Hi, I'm Lori Valevsky, and I work at Wolf Ridge Environmental Learning Center in Finland, Minnesota, and I'm a naturalist and an informal educator there.
Lori, how do you get to be a bander of hummingbirds?
I got my start as an intern at Wolf Ridge, and by banding songbirds up there. And so, teacher first got me interested in birds when I was in first grade. We'd have to do little reports with birds, and ruby-throated hummingbirds was one of the birds that I chose to look at. So I think I've always had a love of birds. And then when I was introduced to bird banding at Wolf Ridge, that just sort of carried over. I had hummingbird feeders at my yard, and I was like, I want to get to know these individuals. Are they the same birds that are coming back year after year? And through the network of people who band birds, I met someone else who had a hummingbird permit. And by doing an apprenticeship, I was able to work with him and get my permit to band hummingbirds. The permits are issued through the United States Geological Survey, so it's a federal permit to band hummingbirds, and it's a standalone permit, different from other birds because they are so small and specialized.
What's the purpose of banding hummingbirds?
Well, like with any bird, it's to learn some things about them we don't know. So we want to learn things about like where they migrate, maybe what they eat, how long they live. Those are some of the things that we can start to determining by putting the band on. We don't learn that, but if we catch the bird with the band on again, then we can start to determine some of those things.
How many birds on the average do you band in a year?
Well, myself for hummingbirds, I probably band maybe 100 a year, but there are folks that I know that band ruby-throated hummingbirds that live in southern Illinois, and they're doing 5,000 to 6,000 a summer. So that's what they do. They're retired and they have their homes that they go to that have lots of feeders, and they do that every single day. And so it can be quite a few birds that can get banded.
Do hummingbirds return to the same place each year?
They certainly will, yeah. If they find a territory that has lots of hummingbird feeders or lots of flowers, it's a really good habitat there, sure, they're going to come back to the same place each year. And I'm sure that you probably have hummingbird feeders at your house. And if you don't have that up when they arrive, they're looking in that window. They know right where that feeder was, and they're asking for, hey, get this out there. So yes, if they find a good restaurant, they'll be back year after year.
Have you ever caught some of the birds that have been banded before?
I have. In fact, I've caught some in my yard that I have branded previous years, and I also had the opportunity that I got really lucky, and I caught a bird that someone else had banded in Texas. So I got information back on that band, and I found out that it was banded as a hatch year bird in fall, and I caught it in spring the next year in northern Wisconsin. I was actually banding there. And so we learned from that birds migrate at least from Texas to northern Wisconsin, and that it could live at least 1 year.
That was my next question is what is the life expectancy of a hummingbird?
I would say average life expectancy is probably 1 to 3 years. Longevity records for ruby throat are up in the 9 to 10 year range.
How many types of hummingbirds come to Minnesota?
In the eastern half of the United States, we have only one species of hummingbirds that will nest, and that is the ruby-throated hummingbird. So they'll fly from here down to Central or South America. So if you think of Costa Rica as a great spot to go find wintering ruby-throated hummingbirds.
So when you catch a hummingbird, what do you do with it?
Well, the first thing is I need to identify it to species, and then I also need to identify to age and sex so I can determine what size band that I put on the bird.
How can you tell those things?
Well, we can take a look at their feathers, different measurements, their weight, their beak length, their wing length. All those things will help us figure those out.
So, about how much does a hummingbird weigh?
Our average hummingbird, well, a ruby-throated hummingbird weighs about 3.5 grams. The males are usually lighter weight and smaller in many of their measurements than the females.
What in the world do you use to measure a hummingbird?
So there's a variety of tools that we use to weigh and measure the birds. Obviously, they're really tiny and specialized. So we have special pliers here that are used to close the bird around, to close the band around the bird's leg. And there's circles you can see cut in here, so they'll close it exactly so it won't pinch on the leg here. So when I'm banding ruby throats, I'm actually using two different sizes of bands. I use a slightly larger band on the females, and this band is cut to a length of 5.6 millimeters long. The males is a little bit smaller. This one's only going to be 5.4 millimeters long.
What do the bands look like?
Well, they're right on here. so yeah.
That's the band?
So that is the band on there. They are very tiny. Here, this is some what I call blank bands that they wear the strip from between the bands. So part of being a hummingbird bander is you have to make the bands yourself. So from the federal government, they'll send the bands to you, and they're printed on a sheet of aluminum metal. Now this is just a photocopy of that sheet, and this has 300 bands on it. And so each of these rows of bands gets cut to so that it's 1.3 millimeters high, and that's going to be the same for whatever species of hummingbird that you band. So if I was in Arizona and maybe I band a magnificent hummingbird, that's a very large hummingbird compared to a ruby throat, I would need to cut the band strip longer to make the band the proper size.
What are the measurements that you take?
So I'll take a variety of different measurements. One is I'm taking their beak length. That is a characteristic that generally in the female ruby throats is longer than the males. So that can again help me identify perhaps the young birds that look just like the female by their sexes. So the males tend to have smaller beaks, shorter wings, longer tails, and weigh less. As an adults, the males will have the ruby throat and no white on the tips of their tails, whereas the female birds will have the white tips, longer beaks, longer wings, and shorter tails, and just a white throat as opposed to the ruby throat. To measure the length of the beak, wing, and tails, I use a calipers. This is a digital calipers, and I simply slide it out and hold it to the beak. We can use my hummingbird here to demonstrate that. And so I'm going to look at the exposed length of the beak. And this hummingbird beak length is 41.04 millimeters.
So is that pretty close to what it would be in real life?
It is. I was shocked by that too.
Okay.
So we can measure their beak that way. We're going to measure their wing that way, and we would measure from their wrist to the wing tip, and then we'd also measure their tail length in the same method. Taking the various measurements help us identify birds to perhaps their species or their sex.
How do you handle a hummingbird?
Well, there's a variety of different ways that I can hold the bird, but often when I'm taking those measurements, I'll place them in, this is just a toe cut off a nylon, and it makes it just a little bit easier to work with a bird that can be very fast and feisty and ready to go on its way, so it doesn't escape. Yeah.
So do you submit the information that you gather to a central location?
Yes, and that goes back to USGS, and they collect all the data there. And if anybody ever finds a hummingbird or any other bird that has a band on it, you can go online and say that you found a lost band, and that will direct you to the site, and you read the number on the band, and you will get information back telling you where that bird was originally banded, what kind of bird it was, how old it was, and any other information that they can share from the database.
Well, this has been absolutely fascinating. I don't know about you guys, but doesn't she do a wonderful job?
Thank you.
Thank you so much for teaching us.
You're welcome.